Stranger Things has everything. A storyline set in the 80s, countless pop culture references, and a premium selection of grisly monsters. Today we'll create a VFX destruction scene heavily inspired by it. If the only thing you remember from the season 3 finale is a hilarious rendition of Neverending Story, don't worry, I've got you covered. You see, there was also a gigantic monster on the loose and it likes to break stuff. So that is our cue. Nasty monster, big destruction, let's go! Instead of building a creature from scratch, I start with an example character that's built into my 3D application. This dude looks way too human, so we'll have to modify the arm and grow him a couple extra limbs. It's always nice to have a few spare ones anyway. Any resemblance to xenomorphs, living or dead, is purely coincidental. And xenomorphs don't have weird tentacle digits, do they? Check out this icky feature, the guy's face is still visible under the creature's chin. To quickly add detail, I'll use a technique called displacement mapping. The concept is very simple. You map an image onto your model and the surface is then lowered or raised depending on where the image is light and where it is dark. To get organic results, I create 5 different versions of the displaced creature and mix them together using various blending operations. And this causes some areas of the big guy to be displaced in one style, other areas in another style. The next fancy term on today's agenda is the Boolean operation. The Boolean subtraction, to be precise. It takes the volume of one shape and removes it from another shape, which allows me to cut holes into the model. The more complex I make the cutting shape, the more complex the result will be. I want to turn the monster into a thin hull with cavities, so I use a smaller, noised up version of it to cut away most of its interior and create holes. Later I'll fill the interior back up, but we'll keep it like this for now because it's good to visualize the surface detail. It looks so cuddly, doesn't it? While I understand your desire to turn this handsome creature into a 3-story tall pet, I just have to boost its ugliness a bit. And therefore I add a bunch of blisters and lumps. I don't want to overdo it, having a bunch of these here and there breaks up the surface just enough to increase the yuck factor. I think the muscles of our new friend should be more prominent. We identify suitable areas and inflate them to give the appearance of badass muscles. And this is far from being anatomically correct. You have to understand, with only limited literature on the anatomy of mind flayers, there was simply no way for me to make it more accurate. Here comes another layer of detail. I'm adding these weird tendons, or whatever you want to call them. I do this by scattering points, connecting them into lines, giving them thickness and thinning them out in the middle, and then I merge them into the main model. Now we need teeth, lots of them. To build them, I shatter a cube into segments and make them smooth. I line them up like the usual suspects and only keep the ones I dig. The others get a one-way ticket to wherever the tooth fairy lives. And this freak of nature has canines growing absolutely everywhere. If you think about it, it's kind of the perfect coat rack. Obviously, I raise up the gums around the teeth, wouldn't want them to fall out. It's time to turn our companion from grayscale into color. After all, it's 1984 already. I use various dirt and grunge textures to make the surface detail interesting. It's important to vary the reflectiveness of the material. Nothing should be uniform, we need to break up the detail as much as possible. I use a few geometry attributes to help with this. For instance, I can query the thickness of the model to modify the hue of the tissue. With the monster done, we'll now need an environment. Nothing easier than that. We simply type in a cheat code to bring up the super secret menu and press the appropriate button. Ah, now that's what I'm talking about. The mall looks nice, but it lacks neon lights. I didn't want to use any real brands for the shot, so I used a bunch of made up names for the signage. Seeing these ridiculously cool signs, I very much understand if you get the strong urge to pick up a VHS tape from VidVista or play the latest and greatest 8-bit games at Beast Arcade. Lighting up the place with neon signs in every color you can think of certainly adds a ton of atmosphere. Interestingly enough, most of the purple tint you see is not created by purple lights. Instead, the cold blue lights around the pillars mix with the warm orange lights, which makes parts of the scene look purple. The fancy term for this is additive light mixing. And if you were wondering, this of course is the Digipiction Mall. What a beautiful sign! By perturbing the prominent surfaces, we get wavy reflections, for example here in the windows, which is exactly what we want. These are the kinds of things we see every day without really noticing them. I always try to get rid of those disgustingly straight CGI edges. It's time for some destruction. We use a simplified shape instead of the actual monster in order to speed up the physics simulation. Destruction usually requires fragmenting the geometry ahead of time into lots and lots of small pieces. If you simulate the fragments directly, the result is undesirable because they come apart immediately. To avoid this unnatural behavior, we create links between the pieces. These invisible links, also called constraints, keep the fragments bonded together. There are many custom methods to control the bonding and the fragmenting. For most materials, it's a good idea to allow the links to be flexible, and this way they can bend and separate a bit, which forms realistic cracks before they eventually break. Destruction sims are far from automatic and require a lot of effort. You need to set up all the geometry in a very specific way and put aside considerable time for tweaking simulation parameters. Let's get back to the monster. We need to create an animation rig. This is essentially a skeleton with joints and bones that we can move and animate, and the monster geometry will later follow the skeleton's movement. The rigging process is very technical and very boring. I'm keeping the structure basic because I'll only be doing a single shot with a limited amount of animation. If I wanted to give the creature the ability to breakdance or move across the scene in any meaningful way, I'd have to put in a lot more effort. Once the rig is done, I can move and rotate the various bones to start posing the monster. Each relevant pose is stored as a keyframe, and the software interpolates between the keyframes. This means that I don't have to create a pose for every single frame, which would be extremely tedious. And that's not to say that animation is a quick and easy affair. It's always tricky to get the timing just right and make the creature feel like it has weight and purpose in all of its movements. You need to go back and forth between tweaking keyframes and playing the animation to see how the sequence feels in motion. We're in luck because the character doesn't have fingers, eyes, or a particularly expressive face, which means less components that need to be animated. I knew something was still missing. Threads of saliva. To really sell the idea of this gloopy monster with 80% body fat and 10% teeth, I designate several areas of the creature as simulation targets. And the simulation then uses my animation data to calculate tissue movement as the monster falls through the ceiling and makes its way towards the camera. Just look at how gracefully the lard vibrates, and stare in awe at those delicate saliva strings. We previously ran the destruction sim with a static temporary monster shape. Now we bring in the animated monster to make it interact with the debris. You probably didn't notice, but there is an invisible collision object in the camera path to make sure that no big fragments land directly in front of the camera. We don't want anything blocking the view. Another physics cheat I had to apply was the timing of our heavyweight champ. I realized that it became nearly invisible amidst all the debris, so I delayed its fall by a dozen frames. Now the ceiling comes down first and then the monster follows half a second later. Since you can never have too much detail, I added extra particle debris and a dust simulation. And there's so much mayhem going on in my scene that I had to reduce the dust opacity by a lot, toning it down significantly in order not to create complete visual chaos. Speaking of visual chaos, of course we need flickering lights. They shouldn't be distracting, and I ran several tests before I settled on a pattern. To make the monster stand out, I gave it a couple of special light sources that only affect it, not its surroundings. And with that, we're done. Please enjoy the final shot twice, and I'll see you next time.